Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I will be reading the ad bulletin today. The Ukraine update, day 708 of a conflict. The EU has agreed to a €50 billion support package for Ukraine as Viktor Orban bows to pressure. Ukraine is reported to have carried out heavy missile strikes on military targets in Crimea, including the Baalbek airfield used by occupying Russian forces, with possible losses of Russian aircraft and personnel. Ukraine's Air Force commander, General Mykola Olushik, acknowledged the Baalbek attack, sharing online a video of an explosion and calling it a cleansing of Crimea from the Russian presence. A Russian military radar was hit earlier in the apparent preparations for a Crimea attacks. U.S. legislation for more aid to Ukraine will probably be split from a $110 billion national security package that also covers the U.S.-Mexico border security. The Republican Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, has told visiting speakers from the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. U.S. President Joe Biden has continued to use presidential powers to work around the Republican blockade. His Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has notified the Greek government that the U.S. will transfer to Greece's military surplus equipment, including C-130 planes, 60 Bradley armored fighting vehicles, which are prized by the Ukrainians, ships, trucks, and other equipment. There is an agreement that Greece will make an equivalent transfer of equipment to Ukraine, according to Greek media reports. Russian bombs struck a hospital in Veliki Burluk, northeast of Kharkiv, on Wednesday, smashing windows and equipment, prompting the evacuation of dozens of patients, regional officials have said. Russia and Ukraine have conducted a major prisoner of war exchange 1 week after a previous swap was shelved when a Russian Tu-76 transport plane was shot down. Russia and Ukraine both said that about 200 prisoners were exchanged on Wednesday. The EU expects to reach 52% of its target to send 1 million rounds of shells to Ukraine by March this year and plans to train another 20,000 soldiers, said the EU's top diplomat Josep Borrell. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, has found Russia violated some of the parts of a UN anti-terrorism treaty by not investigating financial support for pro-Russian groups in eastern Ukraine in 2014. The ICJ ruled that Russia violated the UN anti-discrimination treaty by failing to protect education in the Ukrainian language in Crimea. Vladimir Putin has claimed that Russian troops were holding ground on the outskirts of the East Ukrainian town of Avdiivka. Russia has failed to take down the town despite repeated attempts that have cost Russia thousands of casualties and hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. Ukraine claimed to have carried out another drone attack on an oil facility deep inside Russian territory, according to a military intelligence source. Putin will visit Turkey to meet its president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, on the 12th of February, a Turkish official has said. Because of an international criminal court, ICC, warrant for war crimes, Putin can't travel to many places abroad, but Turkey does not recognize the ICC. Moving on to the Israel and Gaza updates. At least 27,019 Palestinians have been killed and 66,139 injured in the Israeli assault on Gaza since the 7th of October. The Health Ministry in Gaza has said. In its statement, the ministry said in the past 24 hours, 118 Palestinians were killed and 190 injured. Images from the Gaza Strip today show that the Israeli bombardment continues. U.S. President Joe Biden said he was engaged day and night to bring enduring peace with the two states for two peoples. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society, PRCS, said it has lost contact with a team of paramedics dispatched to rescue a terrified 6-year-old Palestinian girl, Hind Rajab, trapped under a car with her dead family in North Gaza. The organization said it was first contacted by Lion Hameda, a 15-year-old relative of the 6-year-old, who was trapped with her in the vehicle near a petrol station in Gaza City as Israeli tanks and troops approached. Al Jazeera is reporting that the Gaza Health Ministry has said that more than 30,000 displaced people in schools near Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis have no water, food, or baby formula. The Palestinian news agency Wafa reports that at least 41 Palestinians were detained by Israeli forces inside the Israeli-occupied West Bank yesterday, bringing the total number detained since 7th October to nearly 6,460. President Biden has issued an executive order targeting Israeli settlers who have been attacking Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, imposing financial sanctions and visa bans in an initial round against 4 individuals. In its latest operational briefings, Israel's military has claimed to have destroyed a large-range missile launcher to be continuing to operate in northern and central Gaza, killing dozens of people it described as terrorists. Israeli media reports that Hamas representatives are again conducting talks in Cairo on the outlines of a possible hostage deal, with Egypt and Qatar mediating. Israeli protesters have this morning been attempting to prevent trucks departing from Ashdod port. The protesters believe they are carrying humanitarian aid destined for the Gaza Strip. It is an extension of demonstrations that were being held at the Karim Shalom border crossing by Israeli campaign groups that want to see all aid to Gaza blocked. American forces have carried out strikes in Yemen against 10 attack drones and a ground control station belonging to the Iran-backed Houthi rebels, according to the US military. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operation, UKMTO, issued a warning about a later incident in the Red Sea near Yemen when a vessel reported an explosion a distance off its starboard side. Italy's defense minister has said that disruption in the Red Sea shipping caused by attacks by Yemen's Houthis risks destabilizing the Italian economy. Yemen's foreign minister urged the EU to increase pressure on the Iran-aligned Houthis. The Yemen Houthi leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, has said today that U.S. attempts to involve China with mediating the issues of the Red Sea attacks showed that the US and UK have failed in their mission. In the UK, the Bank of England leaves interest rates unchanged at 5.25%. The Bank of England has kept borrowing costs unchanged for the fourth consecutive month, although it has dropped the hint that the next move in interest rates will be downwards, after forecasting inflation will fall below 2% within months. In a widely expected decision in the bank's Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, voted by a majority to keep interest rates at the current level of 5.25%, the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. One member of the panel, the independent economist Svati Dhingra, pushed for an immediate reduction in the borrowing costs in a powerful signal to financial markets that the central bank was edging closer to taking action. The Bank of England stressed that more evidence was required that inflation would stick at the target set by the government before the bank could deliver a first cut to borrowing costs since the start of the pandemic. It warned that risks from fast rising prices remained amid the cost of a living crisis. The bank issued a downgrade in forecast for inflation, predicting a fall to below 2% in May for the first time since early 2021. Although it warned that inflation was likely to rise above the target rate later this year amid robust pay growth in the UK economy and the fading impact from lower energy prices. The Bank of England has left borrowing costs unchanged since September, having paused its most aggressive hiking cycle in decades. The central bank lifted rates from a record low of 0.1% in December 2021, driving up the cost of mortgages and loans for millions of households. The prospect of interest rate cuts will provide a boost for Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister prepares to send voters to the polls in a general election expected this autumn. Financial markets are anticipating a reduction of borrowing costs of up to 1 percentage point. Our next story is Labour ruling out the raising of corporation tax. A day after Rachel Reeves announced she will not reinstate the banker's bonus cap, the Shadow Chancellor pledged to businesses that Labour will not raise the corporation tax above its current rate of 25% during the next Parliament. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said today that the tax pledge included maintaining full expensing, which allows businesses that invest in IT equipment and machinery to claim back up to 100% of the cost of investment by writing off against tax on their profits. She said Labour would also maintain the annual investment allowance introduced by Jeremy Hunt. Speaking at a conference in London attended by 400 executives, Reeves said business and government must work together like never before. She said that Labour believes that a 25% rate strikes the correct balance between the needs of our public finances and the demands of a global economy. Ms. Reeves said the next Labour government will make the pro-business choice and the pro-growth choice. We will cap the headline rate of corporation tax at its current rate of 25% for the next Parliament. The Shadow Chancellor's announcement came ahead of a debate in the UK Parliament on how the Westminster-made cost of living crisis has led to a decline in living standards for people in Scotland, and called for the Westminster government to fix its mess by bringing in support for households paying the price. Glasgow South MP Stuart MacDonald advocated for enhanced incomes, comprehensive housing support, encompassing mortgages and rent assistance, measures to address energy bills, and initiatives to tackle rising food prices, urging the UK government to take action. Recent reports have shown that 15 years of wage stagnation, resulting in £11,000 annual loss for British workers, and over 4 in 10 struggling with paying their energy bills and rent. 5.5 million UK adults are behind on their energy bills, and around 4 in 10 adults spend more than usual when food shopping. Commenting, the SNP's Stuart MacDonald MP said, Westminster-made cost of living crisis is hammering millions of household budgets, leaving far too many people suffering from poverty and financial hardship. Our household budgets and incomes lag behind our European counterparts, a consequence of over a decade marked by poor decision-making and a failure to adequately plan for the future investments and needs. Mr. MacDonald said that the SNP Scottish Government is doing what it can to improve living standards and address the cost of living crisis, as he pointed to the Scottish Child Payment, which has lifted 90,000 children in Scotland out of poverty and is protecting Scottish families from Westminster's bedroom tax and housing benefit cap. Today, the National Union of Students report on higher education in Scotland. The National Union of Students has published a report outlining difficulties and failures in education in Scotland. President of the Scottish National Union of Students, Ellie Gomersall, led an online launch event today with representatives from the National Society of Apprenticeships, University of College Union Scotland, and the Educational Institute of Scotland present, all there to show solidarity and plan collaboration. The report is the first of 3 upcoming reports. This one focuses on gathering data and examples on where the Scottish education system has failed and what problems are facing students. The next report, to be worked on in the following weeks, will explore international solutions for these problems and their effectiveness, and the last report will aim to create an actionable plan of how to establish a stronger education system. Today's report, which can be found online, lists some of the following stats. Over the last 10 years, university and college staff have faced a real terms pay cut of at least 20%. On the other hand, principals of top universities have had skyrocketing salaries, with some doubling or even tripling what the First Minister earns. 60% of students work alongside studying, And of those working, 72% work over the QB review's recommended 10 hours of working for students. Average student rent rose by 34% between 2018 and 21, while average inflation over the same period was 1.8%. This disparity continues to grow as purpose-built student accommodation, PBSA, is not included in the Scottish Government's rent cap. 12% of students have experienced homelessness. Difficulties with housing have left more and more students commuting and relying on public transport, which varies in availability, consistency, and price across Scotland. And the cost of public transport has been rising considerably above the rate of inflation. 74% of students in Scotland have reported low well-being, with 45% reporting experiencing a serious psychological issue they felt needed help. The president of the Education Institute of Scotland, Anne-Marie Harley, brought up the issue brought up the issue of colleges struggling for credits and funding, leading to different institutions increasingly offering vastly different selections of courses, forcing more students to relocate or compromise on their studies. The EIS pledged support for the National Union of Students campaign and mentioned upcoming industrial action. The staff lead of the National Society of Apprentices, Benkin Ross, also offered up some of his society stats at the online launch. 50% of students are talking about cutting back on food. 20% are already cutting back on sanitary products. Scotland is the only part of the UK where apprenticeships have no legal training standards. Public money directed at the apprenticeships is siphoned out, and there's fear among apprentices, stopping them from speaking up when paid under the minimum apprentice pay or when treated poorly. Moving on, the First Minister chairs a cross-party meeting on net zero. First Minister Hamza Yousaf has chaired a cross-party discussion on Scotland's climate change ambitions. The First Minister invited party leaders to discuss how to address the climate crisis as he highlighted the Parliament's shared goal of securing a future that is fair and just for all. Mr. Yousaf urged all parties to lead and promote behaviour changes for everyone in society. Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Independent UK Climate Change Committee, the CCC, presented updated information on where Scotland is in its journey to net zero. Speaking ahead of a meeting, the First Minister said, "Tackling the climate and nature crises is the collective fight of our lifetime, with implications for generations to come. The discussion will focus both on the challenges and opportunities we face in reaching net zero. We collectively made a commitment to deliver on net zero when Parliament backed the Act on a cross-party basis. There must be a recognition from across the political divide that we require bold action to tackle the scale of the climate crisis and meet our ambitions on net zero. In addition to our climate change plan, we are developing the first set of just transition plans to set up how these changes impact different parts of society and how we can promote a fair path to net zero and a climate resilient Scotland. We will continue to implement net zero policies and deliver funding to where it is needed the most, with the highest impact. From today's meeting, I am hopeful that we can continue to work towards to implement net zero policies, thereby helping to create a better and more sustainable planet for us all." The post-Brexit food labelling rules to appease the DUP will lead to higher prices. Forcing all UK supermarkets to put not for EU labels on meat, dairy and plant products in a move to assuage the concerns of unionists in Northern Ireland will force up prices and undermine the war against inflation, ministers have been told. After months of uncertainty about the post-Brexit regulations, the government has said it will legislate so that the labelling requirement is universal from October as part of a safeguarding the union deal with the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP. The government is trying to convince the DUP, Northern Ireland's biggest unionist party, to return to Stormont power sharing executive after a bitter 2 year standoff over a trade border in the Irish Sea created by Brexit. As part of a new deal, ministers have said they will go further than is required under the so-called Windsor Framework Agreement that the EU with the EU that is designed to ensure meat, dairy, and plant products do not enter the single market via Northern Ireland. Rather than just products coming into Northern Ireland from Britain requiring not for EU labels, all agricultural foods sold in the UK will need to be labeled to ensure no incentive arises for businesses to avoid placing goods on the Northern Ireland market. Unionists have raised concerns that restricting the labeling requirements to goods transported into Northern Ireland from Great Britain will lead to a dwindling in the range of products going across the Irish Sea. Waitrose is among the supermarket brands that do not have stores in Northern Ireland, but which will be affected by the draft legislation. It has claimed that redesigning the packaging will add unnecessary costs when we are doing everything we can to keep costs down. Karen Betts, the chief executive of the Food and Drink Federation, said it had been in quite insubstantial discussions with government for months about what was a very complicated and expensive way of ensuring the full array of British products are sold in Northern Ireland. She claimed the requirement would cost the industry about £250 million a year, and that the legislation would inevitably lead to a rise in prices for consumers. Earlier this month, the Scottish Government's Rural Affairs Secretary, Mary Goujon, wrote to the UK government expressing her opposition to the proposed rollout of not for EU labelling on food and drink products across the whole of the UK from October. Despite the fact that food labelling is a devolved matter, Ms. Goujon said she had concerns. Arbitrarily adding costs to businesses at a time when consumers are already facing a cost of living crisis. The Food and Drink Federation of Scotland has called for a proportionate alternative, and Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs Mary Goujon has sought further clarification from the UK government, given the information that has been provided to us so far is limited and does not currently represent a convincing argument to provide any real evidence, which this blanket measure is considered a proportionate approach. Why this blanket measure is considered a proportionate approach. Our next story is the farmers from across the EU stage protests in Brussels. Hundreds of protesting farmers have thrown eggs and stones at the European Parliament, lighting fires, dumping manure, and setting off fireworks to put pressure on the summit of European leaders to do more to help them with taxes, rising costs, and environmental rules. Many farmers had traveled from countries across Europe, including France, Germany, and Italy, after weeks of protests in which tractors have blockaded roads, ports, and entrances to cities. Small groups of protesting farmers in Brussels tried to tear down barriers in front of the European Parliament, but police fired tear gas and sprayed water to push them back. A statue on the square was damaged, and main roads in Brussels were blocked by about 1,300 tractors and agricultural trucks emblazoned with slogans such as "No farmers, no food." Security personnel in riot gear stood guard behind barriers where the leaders were meeting at the European Council headquarters. Piles of black smoke from the pyre of rubber tires filled the air, and at one point police were forced to hose down burning straw and manure that had been unceremoniously dumped in front of the Parliament building. If you see how many people we are here today, and if you see it's all over Europe, you must have hope. Kevin Burtons, a Belgian farmer, told Reuters. You need us, help us. Pierre Sandstrup, a Belgian dairy farmer, told AFP that it was symbolically important to protest in Brussels. To change things, you have to come here, he said. Farmers' union representatives said they were fed up in general with too much administration and rules telling them how they should farm. Olivier de Valcanier from the Federation Wallon d'Agriculture said, "We want a change. We want farming to be protected, not undermined." Farmers in different European countries have said they are not being paid enough for their produce or struggling with taxes and green rules and face unfair competition from abroad. While the farmers' crisis is not officially on the agenda of the EU summit, which so far has focused on aid to Ukraine, an EU diplomat said the situation with farmers was likely to be discussed later in the day. In a sign of a pressure on the French government, the President, Emmanuel Macron, scheduled a one-on-one meeting with the European Commission chief, Ursula von der Leyen. Macron's office said the two would discuss the future of European agriculture after farmers' protest in France. The Scottish Government publishes the spring budget revision. The Scottish Government has today published the spring budget revision, which provides the Scottish Government with a final opportunity to make changes to the Scottish budget of 2023 to 2024. Additional funding that has become available since the budget was passed and is being allocated, and some funding previously agreed relocated across portfolios. The spring budget revision will be considered by the Finance and Public Administration Committee of the Scottish Parliament before the final budget stage 3 debates. Commenting on the publication of the spring budget revision for 2023 to 24, Scottish Budget Minister for Community Wealth and Public Finance, Tom Arthur, said, "The spring budget revision sets out the lengths the Scottish Government has had to go to achieve a balanced budget amid extremely challenging and volatile conditions. High inflation, public sector pay deals, the continued cost of living crisis, and wider geopolitical events mean careful consideration has had to be given to balancing the Scottish budget." Mr. Arthur pointed to over £630 million of savings having been identified thanks to active management and reprioritization of budgets across the year to achieve a balanced budget. Despite the economic and financial pressures, the Scottish Government has faced and continues to face. Despite the UK autumn statement delivering a worst-case scenario for Scotland's finances, the Scottish Government say that they are continuing to invest in key services and priorities. Mr. Arthur said that providing more than £800 million of additional funding to the health and social care services, including £235 million of capital support, is an example of how the Scottish Government will ensure people will continue to benefit from high-quality healthcare provisions. We continue to demonstrate careful and considerate handling of the nation's purse while we seek to support our social contract commitment to people across Scotland, said Mr. Arthur. Our next story is the Scottish Government publishing the Islands Connectivity Plan. The Scottish Government has today published a strategic plan to improve the reliability and resilience of transport links for island communities, which has been published today. The Islands Connectivity Plan, ICP, strategic approach sets out a long-term vision of how ferry services, supported by other transport modes, will be delivered and improved on in the future. It will replace the current ferries plan, but will be wider in scope, also taking into account of aviation and fixed links, as well as onward and connection travel. Key actions include improving the reliability of our ferry services by modernizing the CMAL fleet, reducing the average age of a vessels to around 15 years by the end of a decade. Building the resilience of a ferry network by increasing standardization of vessels and ports. Refresh transport connectivity needs assessments for island and peninsula communities served by the Clyde and Hebrides and Northern Isles ferry services. Hebrides, sorry. The Clyde and Hebrides Northern Isles ferry services. Detailed appraisals of fixed links proposals of Sound of Harris, Sound of Barra, and Mull. Alongside the draft ICP strategic approach, a refreshed vessels and ports plan for the Clyde and Hebrides and Northern Isles ferry services is also being published. Transport Scotland will be consulting on both these documents. Minister for Transport Fiona Hislop said, Islanders have made clear to me that they have and deserve to have high expectations of transport services to meet their connectivity needs. They want a system they can deliver where they can deliver reliability and resilience in challenging weather environments as a result of a changing climate. The island's connectivity plan sets out to capture the transport connectivity needs of islanders and ferry users on mainland peninsulas. It recognizes that we must ensure our islands remain attractive places to live, to visit, and to relocate to. The island connectivity plan looks to issue a wide range of issues, from improving fleet reliability and monitoring performance, to reduce carbon emissions and making future contracts more flexible to respond to community needs. It also considers aviation and fixed links. As always, the views of island communities and stakeholders will be key to this process. We officials will be hosting a series of engagement events across our network, and an online consultation will be carried out to ensure the views of the people that rely on our island transport links are heard and incorporated into this work. The Scottish Government is absolutely committed to ensuring that transport connectivity to our islands is reliable, affordable, and inclusive. To support the economic and population growth of these communities, and this island connectivity plan sets out a comprehensive plan to follow on from the 6 new vessels being delivered by 2026. Our next story, the PHS encouraged students to be aware of the signs and symptoms of meningitis. As the new term starts for Scottish universities and colleges, Public Health Scotland (PHS) has launched a campaign to ensure people are aware of the importance of vaccinations and the signs and symptoms of meningitis. PHS say the vaccines offer the best protection against certain causes of meningitis. Anyone who's under 25 years of age and has not yet had the free meningitis ACWY vaccine is encouraged to take up the offer. Students who have moved to Scotland from overseas are encouraged to make sure they are up to date with vaccinations offered for free by NHS Scotland. Meningitis can be very serious and life-threatening if not treated quickly. It is important to be aware of the signs and symptoms of meningitis, as they can develop suddenly. You should seek medical advice as soon as possible if you're concerned that you, your child, or someone you know could have meningitis. As is often the case in winter, there have been a small increase in invasive meningococcal diseases, including meningitis, in recent weeks. So PHS recommend that people should be aware of the signs and symptoms of meningitis, which can be found at the nhsinform.scot/meningitis site. PHS say you should call NHS 24 free on 111 to seek urgent medical help if you are concerned. That's the last story we have for this evening. Thank you so much for joining me, Patryk Witkowski. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who has donated to our emergency crowdfunder over the past 2 weeks. We are now only £2,000 short of our target and very hopeful that we will reach the £10,000 goal by the end of a week. Although the immediate pressure has eased and we can now focus on securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland, our need to grow our subscriber base and increase our funding is still urgent. But with that note, I wish you a good night and thank you for watching.